So, okay. Hello, everyone. This is
Hello.
our Dialogic Pedagogy podcast number 30. And the topic is embodiment in dialogic education towards erotic interpersonal pedagogy.
Oh, wow.
This will be held by Jim Cresswell, who is right there. And so far, participating in this podcast are Lakshmi Bandlamudi and Anna Marjanovic-Shane and Eugene Matusov. Other people may probably join us during the podcast, but so far it's only us. So to open it up, Jim, this is a very provocative, of course, title. And so what do you mean by that?
Well, can I spend a bit of time starting off talking about what I've been thinking about Bakhtin language in the body? Can I start there first?
Yeah, of course.
And Lakshmi, the reason I thought that you could join us is you know lots of things, so jump in when you feel like saying something.
Thank you.
I started looking at Bakhtin, almost 15 years ago. And what struck me was his speech genres essay. I did a really close reading of this famous essay. And then I came across this claim with Michael Holquist. And he says that, really you have to take one piece of Bakhtin and just look at it in isolation. So there's no systematic stuff going on. And then I started thinking, I'm not sure about that. And I took a real close look at the Rabelais book and a real close look at the author and the hero and aesthetic activity. And so those three sources kind of got me thinking about the speech genres essay, because I do think the speech genres essay doesn't come out of nowhere. It has its history in these kind of other pieces. And in there, Bakhtin talks, of course, about speech genres, so languages of a community. But what he talks about that I thought was really interesting is this notion of style and embodied habitus, this kind of embodied mode of being. And I read that through the lens of the author and the hero and aesthetic activity, where he talks a lot about the body being shaped in others, right? He talks a lot about the body, our consciousness coming alive in somebody else. And he draws on people like Max Shaler to do some of this stuff, the phenomenologist. And so what I did is I started really thinking through the idea about how language is deeply embodied. And what I mean by that is that language, when I speak language, I also I participate in a communal experience. Like I participate in a community's way of expressing itself, a community's way of engaging and constituting what feels real. And so what I tried to do is kind of bring back this notion of language as an embodied experience by which we kind of shape the world. Now, it's not in the sense that we shape the world through our own individual proclivities or subjectivity. Rather, we shape the world through our participation in language with others. So it's not a subjective thing, there's this world shaping, but it's certainly not objective either, right? So it's a kind of reality that's in between. And so I was really interested and continue to work in this line on this notion of the body being like these kind of felt sensibilities that we have. And instead of saying, well, we have some sort of emotion or physiological experience over which language and culture are laid, I would say, no, language and culture are the physiological experience. Language and culture are in our very physiology, right? If you think about human physiology, we have kind of basically we're escalated or not. And the rest is all about embodying language together with others. So what this did is it opened up for me an avenue to talk about and think about this notion of what does it mean to feel compelled, right? So in a way I was kind of subtly taking on Sartre, and Sartre says you have to get to your core true self and then figure out what's right for you. And I said, well, sure, maybe there's this deep sense of that things matter, right? But it's not as if it's an individual self. Rather, when I go into this, what am I being faithful to? It's about being faithful to others and the languages that we participate in. So when I talk about embodiment, I'm talking about the way in which we are participate in the people's mass body, the quote Bakhtin from the Rabelais book, right? We the whole history of a community. And so that's where I was going with embodiment. and language first off. Lakshmi, do you want to add anything?
Sure. Actually, our Bhakti Buddies seminar in Tokyo, the title of my presentation was, which I'm still working on, and so carnivalization of consciousness and novelization of life. So your observation that Michael's saying that each of Bakhtin's works must be read in a compartmentalized manner. I too, deny that. I reject that because I think without the carnival, the dialogue cannot just proceed. So it is sort of an, they need each other. Are you with me? Are you? Okay. So they need each other in order to sort of live in this kind of an open-ended world. So while language is both embodied and it is also a very textual, abstract, process. So you're absolutely right. That separation and individuation that the language enables, the carnival kind of brings you back into the collective realm, so to speak. And therefore, I'm sorry. So it is a very important, they complement each other, and both are equally important. The language of carnival is based on the body principles. Forgive my telephone, I have no control over it. So you're quite right that's why I want to talk about carnivalization of consciousness, because in the aesthetic realm, which is where art and answerability is, I had written a chapter in a book that I had recently published, edited it, and the title of that paper was Dancing in the Sky of Consciousness. So in the dancing, in the dance form, the body kind of has to kind of suggest the infinite. The body itself is a very finite entity, but then when through the body, when you're suggesting, I don't know, God, then it has to suggest to it must point out to that infinite and push the person into that imaginative horizon to see the body as much larger than what it is. And therefore, even in that aesthetic realm, to be able to sort of make art through body, right? It both expands and it is still kind of centering. It is centering and expansive. I don't know if that makes sense. So these ideas, so I think the key point that you hit is that I do see Bakhtin's work in all its sort of wholesomeness, because dialogue is both a method. It is a mediator in dialogue. It is also an indicator of development, and that's where I think Eugene and Anna, you guys write so much about dialogic pedagogy, where these experiences and these kind of dialogicality in a classroom becomes incredibly beneficial in the learning process, because we need the other. The other is also completely kind of internalized, whether we like it or not. So some of the things that Bakhtin talks about is that mirror metaphor, right? When I look at myself in the mirror, I'm not just simply seeing how I appear to myself, but how I probably appear in the eyes of the others, and how I interpret how others see me. It's like, so the others are already kind of embodied, in my own body. It's sort of inseparable. And that I find it very interesting. Perhaps Eugene and Anna, you can jump in and say something to make this whole thing very dialogic.
I just would want to more understand exactly in what way you mean embodied language? Do you mean a prosody of the language, of the voice itself, the sensory appearance of that, or even the sensory experiences from the meaning that becomes part of the because voice is not just a voice, it transcends itself right away. So I kind of want to pinpoint, where do you see embodiment of the meaning? How does that work for you?
Yeah, thanks so much. Actually, what I've tried to do in kind of my own thinking is really resist. There's I think a tendency in scholarship to kind of create abstract, distinct categories. And when I'm talking about the body and meaning and language, I've actually tried to do the opposite and bringing them together. So, for example, in the voicing, there is sensation, right? There is kind of perception in the voicing, right? There is in a way, the wholeness of oneself is in the expression of language. So when I talk about my fears, it is in my gut as much as it is. And so what I've tried to do with the meaning is say, yes, of course we have meaning, like ostensible kind of reference meaning, but that, of course, is quite shallow, right? When you look at what does something mean, we end up back in this kind of human sensibility, in the sense of, when I say sensibility, I mean literally sense, like to feel, right? Both proprioceptively within, and sense in terms of what I see in the world around me, right? The objects that I form in action, right? In the act of speaking. So when I think what I'm trying to get at, Anna, is, old school social psychologists, they talk about top-down processes, higher order cognitive thinking, and they talk about bottom-up stuff, which is the kind of body, the physiology, right? What I'm doing with when I talk about language and embodiment, I'm trying to actually bring those together and say they're not so far apart, and they're not so different at all. In expressing myself, I express both. They're together in the expression. And when I understand you, I resonate and have that similar kind of, my physiological systems align with yours in that way. Like for example, Merleau-Ponty, the rhythmic shaking of bodies he calls laughter, right? Is the way in which people just flow together. That's kind of a good joke brings together this kind of rhythmic flow, right? This interaction where you see it crossing the either divide. And what I want to pick up on, something that Lakshmi hinted at, is this issue of the aesthetic, because that's where I think we start moving into pedagogy, which is that, just like we were polyphonic, it means that, my embodied experience is not a holistic unit. There's tensions, right? So I could, let's say you have a student come in and they start to participate in the language expressed by the professor in a classroom, for example, and they have this resonance, and maybe it confronts and doesn't align with something they've known from the past, like sometimes you get students who have an ideological commitment that's really different than what's going on in the classroom. And so when I talk about the body, I'm talking about this kind of higher range from cognitive high-level meaning to deeply embodied sensation, that sort of stuff. I don't want to make it sound as if that's a whole experience, because that experience itself is actually fractured and tense as well, right? So I feel, on the one hand, alignment to whatever ideology I've learned, I've embodied, and I feel alignment to another one that I'm learning and engaging in. And so out of these types of tensions, where we feel almost, and this is why Paul, Lakshmi, and I have gone to talk about Eros and psychoanalysis, is that it does talk about these types of tensions located at the site of my body, and resolving them is an aesthetic achievement. Can
you think of the embodiment and sort of the abstraction sort of taken out of the body as a kind of a perennial movement back and forth, rather than a permanent case. See, my current next project that I'm trying to work on is titled Language, Reality, and Laughter. So the way I have formulated this is that all of reality is constituted in language, okay? But certain aspects of reality are accessible only to laughter. And laughter requires an incredible amount of linguistic sophistication in order to produce the wit. So which means in order to understand it is a triadic, one constitutes the other. And therefore we need to study them and understand them in a very interrelated fashion. So that's why I think the embodiment is both, I like to see it as a movement through this kind of an abstraction and concreteness. Because for Bakhtin, when I look at his entire works, he's so interested in ground realities, concrete matters, body issues, not phantom ethics, because he clearly says in the philosophy of act that there is no such thing as aesthetic art and ethical art, but what is aesthetically valid and ethically valid. So it requires us to sort of understand this in very multiple ways. Just last class, yesterday evening, I was teaching till 9:30, we were talking in the classroom about sexual harassment and, all the American politics and Brett Kavanaugh, you name it. So the topic somehow was about, about how that body remembers, when it is violated, the body remembers. And just to provoke a conversation, I had read something from ancient Indian scriptures where in order to heal the wounds of the body, sometimes you need to separate as a therapeutic device to sort of move out of the body and to see the body from an outside perspective. And students kind of responded, what happened to the body that cannot be forgotten, but I can do the healing by stepping out of the body. I don't know if that makes sense, because I'm just thinking out loud about how this movement back and forth, you cannot completely be out of the body, because then there cannot be healing, because you need to know that the pain has been inflicted upon you, right? But as a kind of a momentary, temporary kind of a healing method, you are also able to step out of it and to see, no, my soul cannot be touched, although my body has been violated. In a way that is a kind of an empowering sort of a movement back and forth. So let's hear from Eugene and Anna, because I think this is a very critical issue to bring the body back into philosophy, and Bakhtin definitely helps us do that, in ways that are very productive. So he sees, actually one of the quotations that I like from Bakhtin is, abstraction is nothing but a movement from one concrete to another. So you do need that abstraction for the learning, but it is a vehicle, right, from one concrete to the other. So Eugene, you want to jump in? Eugene and Anna? I think.
Sure. I'm kind of very ambivalent in the notion of embodiment. On one hand, I'm very attracted to that, because for reasons many of you were talking about that. Indeed, like if you look at the social sciences and studying, first of all, the social sciences usually reduce dialogue to discourse. But even if you take dialogue and not discourse, if you ask me what's the difference, I can explain that to you. I think I start getting understanding myself what's the difference between discourse and dialogue. But still the dialogue kind of coming out without body. And so, for example, if you look at about, let's say, classroom interactions, you see, or exchanges, they are in the text and the body is gone completely. Okay, you can little bit approximate that by looking at the, let's say, videotapes of what's going on, but which is better, but still, you're still out of this, like, you, let's next move to the Zoom right now. We see each other, we're in the moment, but still it's not the same if you were being in the room, right?
Yes.
And that's interesting, but the question is, like, what it does with the level, because dialogue deals with the level of authoring ideas. Where is that embodiment of ideas? And I feel it's there, but so far, I feel also danger of mystification.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm trying, which is kind of theoretism. Let me just finish to the end. And this is where I feel a level of mystification going on there. And I want to return in very concrete ways where it is and how. In terms of Bakhtin, in my view, Bakhtin make almost like a loop in his writing. He started with the focus on body and aesthetics. And then he completely abandoned that in the notion of dialogue. Then he moved back to the body in Carnival and whatever. In my view, maybe I'm wrong, but he never really tackled with embodiment of the dialogue, even when he rewrite, in a way, his book about Dostoevsky, because he rewrote that in 60s. And he included a lot of stuff from Carnival, but in my view, he didn't include anything much about what his notion of embodiment. And in a way, dialogue is anti-aesthetics, in my view. And I talk with
anti-aesthetics, you said?
Yes. Because aesthetics is about finalizing, and dialogue is resisting the idea of finalizing and kind of aestheticizing of something. By the way, that's not my idea. I just I suspected that, but I checked with Bakhtinian philologists, and nobody. I asked them very simple questions: what aesthetics? How Bakhtin would define aesthetics from the book of Dostoevsky? And they basically said that that book, by the way, never mentions the word aesthetics there. And he kind of dropped that, and then returned back, but never combined that back to this notion of dialogue. It's still, that's why I'm saying it's kind of interesting loop. But again, this is Bakhtinian thing. It's I'm much less interested in Bakhtin in the sense of the scholarship of Bakhtin by itself. I'm more interested, like, thinking to think about this issue of in education and maybe also outside of education. In the ideas how dialogue is, what does it mean embodied dialogue? And but without mystification. And I think there is a lot of truth there, but I still cannot grasp that. Okay, Anna.
Okay, so it's such a interesting thing to think about it, because I think of dialogue when as both literal and also metaphoric way of touching each other. When you have the feeling, and I think that maybe that's something that you're thinking about, Jim, and I don't know you well, actually, so I don't know how to say that, but when you have a feeling that something touches you on your skin or on your soul, that somebody can move you in certain ways, and it does not have to be only through language, because we all know that very little babies can feel and laugh and feel being touched and touching us. So we don't need to have this linguistic layer on that. However, I think that that's in the core, and I think in the core of that is this Bakhtin's insistence of the concreteness of the event, of the concreteness of the what I would call emotion, or perezhivanje, maybe in Russian or in Serbian. That you're really feeling the moment, and in that sense, I think that has to be in the dialogue preserved to not become discourse only, because I think discourse becomes detached from this very embodied level of feeling or feeling moved to transcend where you are, move to another position, move to see something. I think, Lakshmi, you were talking about seeing things from inside and from the outside. And in that sense, I think I always start with what Eugene was writing earlier, and that was from Bakhtin also, that we are on our boundaries, and from these boundaries where we touch with other, we experience almost like on the skin. That can be, so there are these layers of being in the moment, which is here and now and completely physical, and preserving this physical. You can read a book and be touched like that, especially if you read Dostoevsky or these characters there become for you so embodied that they feel, they touch you. They push you. They make you see things from their eyes and from your own eyes, and start to be in dialogue means to be touched. To me, that's how I understand that.
You know, just after that, Jim, I'll hand it over to you. Eugene, your point about aesthetics being sort of the closure or finalization, but I see that kind of a consummation as a momentary closure with some loopholes, because you cannot completely do the art, any kind of an art, without a kind of a momentary closure. So I see that as a momentary closure.
Yeah.
Let me finish. About words touching, this book, the Difference, Dialogue and Development, I dedicated that to Bakhtin itself, because nobody else spoke to me so it's such a distant land. So whether I worked with an Indian epic that is so timeless, and there is a Russian thinker here, and somehow they kind of met, in a way that people in the contemporary world don't even touch me in that sense, that someone like Vico or someone like Bakhtin, and my whole attempt to take Bakhtin to India, and I convened a conference, Bakhtin conference in India, and that was the book that I had just edited. So it is an attempt to kind of get him in touch with some ancient Indian thinkers, because I think he would like it. That is my perception, because that is a world that he would really celebrate, that kind of diversity and open-endedness and so on. So in that sense, I think when Jim is talking about language, even the written words that have been written many centuries back, or maybe way beyond, in sort of crossing time and space, they still touch us. That's the reason that it is so transformative. And in that sense, I think there is a kind of a very physically embodied, and Jim, your title, what was very provocative about is erotic, right? And I can appreciate that, because the awakening of the mind is also a very sensuous experience, and we see this in the classroom all the time when students have that aha moment. Okay, I got it. It might be very abstract, but the sensation of that understanding is really like something has penetrated my head and it had coagulated in my mind, and therefore I am feeling this euphoria, a very physical kind, and that is very, very, see, that's the reason I feel carnivalization of consciousness is necessary to write honest stories about our life, the novelization of life. Without that honesty, that integrity and the groundedness can very well be lost, because writing is fundamentally a kind of a textual, discursive practice. But in order to bring that embodiment is when I think consciousness itself needs to be carnivalized periodically. We cannot live in a permanent state of carnival. That would be terrible. But periodically, so everything is momentary. So Jim, you want to take over?
In response to the charge of mystification, I do think that's a problem. I mean, that's with my own thinking, in that I do tend to shift over towards being more prone to mystification, because I feel like I'm always resisting the technological false concreteness in a lot of like my academic discipline, and so often I find myself counterbalancing with a more mystical orientation, and so guilty as charged. But but it's interesting. Let's talk about I want to talk about Dostoevsky book for a minute, because it was actually the Dostoevsky book that one little paragraph which really kind of flipped my thinking, where Bakhtin says that dialogic relationships are not discursive relationships. Right. Yeah, and is it about aesthetics? He doesn't say aesthetics anywhere in the dialogue in the book, but the book is called "The Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics." So I mean, that's in the title. It's about creation. But I mean, this whole idea that dialogue is not discursive, and what Bakhtin's getting at there is that there's this. I think where my thinking is now is that where he's going is he's pointing out that we can shift into a mode. I'll call it a lesser mode, where we're just discursive and we're not touching each other the way Anna described anymore, right? Where dialogue can be just almost like cloud talk, or very discursive in the sense like I made the joke about textbooks, which I would say are often pretty discursive, because very rarely do I find a student that says that textbook touched me. Right. But if I give them a tough primary source reading, they just love it. They come out of the class feeling that something is connected with them, right? So if we want to turn to the notion of pedagogy, I would say, yeah, Bakhtin does talk about consummation in the aesthetic book, but it's a very, very technical and careful way in which he uses the notion of consummation. It's always a momentary act that kind of then it always degrades as soon as it's created, right? So what I'm thinking about with education is that good education involves being touched. And of course, I'm playing with the notion of erotic here. I want to be very careful, but it involves this kind of dialogic touching, and where we come alive, we see things differently, we open up in a new way. And it's profoundly interpersonal, and there's real stuff at stake for people. If you want to talk about the concrete, I think one of the problems that we're facing in education is that technology is making it such that it's less and less concrete and less interpersonal.
Yes, I agree.
It's much more about...
Because it's so much of a transference in space rather than that interpenetration of the voices. And I agree with you. And I think for students, it probably is both terrifying and compelling. You know, there is a resistance to that being touched because it's too uneasy. Touched means metaphorically. But that touch is very, that's where I think your point about even that sense of eroticism, right? A moment of awakening, right? That awakening is an incredibly embodied experience. One of the things, this might be very controversial, and so, one of the problems in this whole Me Too movement that we don't talk about is that classroom is a very, both kind of an intimate space where this awakening takes place. So there is that kind of connection that we experience with our professors or with our students. And so sometimes, I'm sure all of us have had this. When I'm explaining something to students, they don't get it. You find 20 different ways. And once a student says, "Damn it, you're so good, Dr. B. That's very sexy." It's just a very innocent kind of a statement, but it is so true. I don't think it felt any other way, and I laughed, and students laughed. It was fine. It's just that you're not supposed to exploit that, but leave it at that, because then that awakening happens. So but in our discourse, we try to sort of separate, even for political reasons or many other reasons, that this embodied kind of learning is something that we are afraid of because we don't know how to handle the awakening moment. It is an incredibly powerful moment, but that moment needs to be both in a kind of a connectedness and also a kind of a distance. So we have to talk about it, but we cannot talk in a certain environment about how students, because I think very often, particularly I teach at a community college, so I'm teaching in the trenches, students really improve the moment they can do their healing about their own life and understand their physicality and the all this, then they're able to sort of move beyond and learn Hegel and Marx and Kant and other wonderful things that we try to give them. Then they feel and then they're able to connect it to their concrete lives in ways a disembodied kind of a knowledge will never permit them. I think, Eugene, your effort to sort of bring this whole dialogic pedagogy, it might have the appearance of mysticism, but I'm very comfortable with mysticism. I grew up in that world, so it's not alien to me at all. So it's not an acquired taste, it's just reality. So let's hear again from Eugene and Anna.
I would like to ask you, Jim, more about what do you mean when you say eroticism? Because see, there are different types of being close or having intimate relationships. The Greeks had 4 words for love. Eros is only one of them. So is it that, or is it another kind of love, or is it another kind of intimacy, or being drawn to each other? Like I'd like to get into the bottom of that. What do you
Yeah. So this is I'm actually playing with this idea right now, trying to put some. So I have some tentative thoughts. That's all I can offer, and it actually starts from what it's not, because what I notice is that when we use the word eroticism, often we go to some sort of affection, and there is affection in the classroom. I think Schiller, I think, was right. Good education entertains and instructs, and it aggravates in the context of a kind of affection, but the problem is, to be in the classroom is not to be anybody's lover, and it's not to be anybody's friend, and it's not to be anybody's parent, right? And so those are the problem is, but those are the 3 kind of erotic relationships that I think students come armed with, right? And in the classroom, they're trying to slot an intimate space, like an intimate affection moment, into one of those 3 types of spaces very often, one of those 3 types of orientations. And so when you say, what do I mean by eroticism? Well, I certainly don't mean anything about any type of paternal type psychoanalytic stuff. I don't mean anything like, some sort of lover or a romantic type eroticism that's ripe for abuse. And I certainly don't mean friend, because I'm often not my student's friend either, right? I'm not any of those things. So the question then is, what is it? And where I'm going right now is I've been reading Herbert Marcuse, and he talks about fantasy, the psychoanalytic notion of fantasy, spelt with a PH. So PH fantasy, as opposed to F fantasy. And
fantasy.
Yeah, so PHAN. What's that?
Like phantom.
Yeah. But it's about this kind of aesthetic moment when you're alive and you wake up. And the moment is a fantasy is when you feel in flow, truly engaged. There's something at stake for you personally. and it's enjoyable and exciting. I think that's where I'm going with eroticism in the classroom, is that's this type of almost aesthetic sensibility, as an aesthetic moment. You contrast that to F fantasy, which is I'll call it an anesthetic moment, where right, where you put people to sleep. Now I will confess, I do have lectures at 8:15 where I do put people to sleep. But there is a way in which he talks about how this F fantasy seems to have kind of an erotic undertone, but it doesn't. It's just about cheap entertainment and cheap thrills that just kind of make you feel good for the moment, but they don't put you at stake, right? They don't put you in the game. They work as a distancing tool almost. So media, for example, technology often enables F fantasy. It makes us feel as if we're enjoying something, but all it does is just kind of put us to sleep. So I go on Netflix, and Netflix will keep playing for me whatever kind of tripe is on there, and it puts me in an anesthetic mode as opposed to an aesthetic one. So when I'm talking about eroticism, I think where I'm going is this deeper sense of joy or engagement, these aesthetic moments in the classroom that actually resist the kind of the eroticism that students come armed with, which would be in the form of those other three relationships. And I call this the moment that kind of wakes people up, where they feel like there's something authentically there that matters to them. Right?
I think this has the same kind of ambiguities that laughter would have.
Yes.
Because laughing at the absurdities of life, the things remain irreconcilable, and we laugh at that because that is what is sort of empowering and liberating. And but in that kind of a laughter, the laughter is a close companion of truth. Whereas where the laughing at somebody, mocking at somebody, that is an abusive laughter. So I think in the same way, when you're talking about the sort of ideas themselves feel eroticized when that is reaching you, in a very embodied manner. And that's where I think that sensuousness and a moment of awakening of it's the same sort of when Bakhtin talks about carnivalesque moment as the equivalent of the mind's, or as a virility, right? Of the mind. So I think somewhere in the Carnival book he talks about it. I'm not getting the right quotation here, but it is a very powerful sort of, and that's the reason for entering into the carnivalesque mode periodically, to be able to kind of lose that sense of I-ness and that false sense of superiority, false sense of uniqueness. And I just merge into the collective crowd, so to speak, and participate in that kind of collective laughter, very infectious kind of a laughter. And I think in a way, I think even in education, that's what sometimes goes on in the classroom when you have that very special moment, right? When there is kind of an energy that is the space itself gets energized. You're not bringing energy. The classroom as a space gets energized, and there is a certain aliveness to the way students, their body language and their vocabulary fills up the air, so to speak. So that is how I too see the sense of. See, this is actually very helpful because it allows me to reframe the issue, because I'm going to India for 2 months from January and February, and the most popular topic that everybody wants to hear is about carnival. And so it needs to be sort of articulated.
Let me tell you, I'm listening to you, I'm realizing that I'm not sexy teacher. I don't want to be sexy teacher. Difficult teacher in that sense, because I like to bring deconstruction things, not something that very pleasant, not about joy. It's not about joy. It's different aha moment, but it's not about joy. And I also see me as more like facilitator of that. I'm not necessarily prime participant of that, because I think it's, I'm for my students, not students for me. And it's a very different thing. But I want to return back to what I'm struggling still. I'm not satisfied actually from hearing things. I mean, it's interesting, but not satisfactory for me. And I'm still thinking about how the notion of idea embodied. And the only one example that I personally experienced, I'm not sure, was when I was actually was in high school. I was studying mathematics, and it was very interesting pedagogy itself of studying mathematics. Basically, nothing was given to by the teacher except teachers, actually plural, except they give us math problems and with short definitions of the concept. It actually was calculus. And I remember that I struggle with the definition of continuous function. And I don't know how much you know all this, or remember calculus. It was done through this kind of approximation and all of this. And I thought, why is it so difficult? Why they take very simple thing? You look at the function on the graph of the function. You know that it's continuous. You see it. It's given to you in your face. Why to hell to create this very complicated, very difficult definition of continuous function, but it's in your face. You know when it's continuous or when it's not continuous. And I struggle, and I tried to ask my teachers about that, and they couldn't understand the question, except one of my teachers who told me, the teachers were actually undergraduate students from, but who were alumni math schools that I was in. And one of them told, Eugene, I don't know what you're talking about, but keep thinking and don't go further. Don't try to solve problems, because you can solve them, but you probably will use kind of procedural approach. I don't know what you struggle with, but it sounds very interesting struggle. Although I don't understand at all what you struggle with. Yeah, but don't move, just stay there. And which was possible, it's another question, how was it possible in that pedagogy not to move at all? So it was probably a few weeks past, and suddenly I've got an idea. Suddenly it was a aha moment after thinking about that. I thought, oh, this is a definition, that calculus definition of this approximate function for blind people. Because blind people cannot see what I see, obviously. This is obviously continuous function, or this is obviously discontinuous function. But how can I explain? Because also I was thinking, what's very simple definition? If you follow that function with the pencil and you don't jump, the pencil doesn't jump, it means it's a continuous function. That's it. I don't need this approximation, all this kind of bizarre thing. But then I thought, blind people will never understand that, because they cannot see the whole thing. So they need to split on this kind of bizarre, discrete moments, because they cannot imagine, especially the blind. I was thinking blindness from birth, that how can they cannot see that. They cannot comprehend from seeing it, in other words. And it's really helped me. Again, I told my teacher, listen carefully, and I said, again, I don't understand what you're just saying, but sounds great. But this is the only thing that I feel when idea really touch body, because I suddenly understand. As soon as I'm still understanding that even now, as soon as I think about all these calculus things, which is mumbo jumbo for me, like I will think why the people did these things. Blind people come to my mind, and it makes perfect sense, all these things. Because as soon as I need to explain the blind person, I will need to move to that calculus things. And this is the only place when I feel, there is some other place, I can tell you some other place, when I feel embodiment meets idea. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what actually I'm more interesting. But I'm also interested in other things as well.
But see, I think now you're starting with something very interesting, because you are creating aesthetic and the construction.
There is no aesthetics there in my view.
Right, with something different than deconstruction and an aha moment in the way how deconstruction.
No, it is not. I disagree. This is typical deconstruction, because I'm deconstructing this calculus idea.
No, you're not listening to what I'm saying. You're connecting embodiment only with one, only with construction, and maybe sometimes you experienced what you thought it is embodiment in the deconstructive way. But I think that both constructive feelings that come from harmony and construction, and the aesthetics embodiment are also feelings that come from being able to analytically deconstruct and create completely something different and destroy, also embodied.
I don't understand what you just said.
I think that you're talking about the two different types of movement, but only connecting one with this embodiment that I think Jim and Lakshmi are talking about.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I don't want to throw deconstruction out, right? Because I think what is it the students struggling with? What institutes, what constitutes or creates conditions like the one you talked about, Eugene? It is deconstruction, right? And education is often about deconstruction, and I think it's precisely that deconstruction that is what makes it so deeply aesthetic education, because what do you do with the pieces, right? And then often students come in, we deconstruct with them, and they're left with the pieces, right? Like students come in and they have a certain worldview, and we talk with them and we deconstruct that worldview.
Talking about awakening, I want to stay more on this embodiment side than on the functional, kind of like functional.
Yeah, but I think it is embodied, right? Because it's very personally relational, right? That in a felt relation. Deconstruction, it works when there is this type of embodied relationship, this interpersonal connection. That's when deconstruction really works, because otherwise it's just an unpersuasive discourse, right? It's not an internally persuasive discourse. It's just something that people will say in class, right? And maybe half my students won't engage this way. I mean, they're quite happy to avoid any internally persuasive discourse, and they'll just write whatever they have to write without really engaging in the deconstruction.
Now,
right?
could it not be that when the reason that one resists is, it was very interesting, Eugene, you spoke about you're not a sexy teacher or something like that, you just said. No, don't take it. But I don't see myself as just a kind of an mediator in a very mechanical sense. I do see that real sort of dialogic pedagogy is that the ideas are, in all areas of my life, because I'm very, very I'm trained in classical music. So words when that come out of my mouth has to be so embodied, and so, it has to touch the audience. It needs to touch me. I need to feel the tactile, sort of sensation of that words. So I don't see whether I'm singing or whether I'm teaching to me or whether I'm talking to you guys. It's all embodied. It's not, because what we are doing in this kind of dialogue, right, is although it is digitally mediated and there is a screen, the words that we are tossing at each other is a kind of a playful thing to sort of explore various possibilities of thinking through embodiment or eroticism, classroom, you name it, all the topics. You may not have that, Eugene, meta-awareness about being a sexy teacher, but when what you talk reaches the students, they may very well feel, experience it. It's not something that we can claim. I don't, just as how I cannot have the final say about my life and myself, because I have to let the other consummate my soul, as Bakhtin would say, because I don't have that ability to do that, because I cannot both enact my soul and consummate my soul all on my own efforts. That is impossible. So we are not you don't go into the classroom thinking, I'm going to be kind of sexy. No, you don't do that. It is an outcome, I would think, of the way we engage with that, because when you talk about interpenetration of voices, automatically there is a kind of a fusion, right? And that is a kind of, and when that fusion occurs, that's where it becomes, so it's not a kind of a sort of what shall I say, pre-programmed kind of attempt to make it sexy. It becomes sexy in the act of when the voices meet. I don't know how else to. Why are we talking so much about naughty subject?
I think that there is definitely some kind of I hate to say again touch, but I definitely don't think that it's in that sense erotic. I think we are onto something, that there is some kind of coming together in some way, but I wouldn't call it fusion, and I wouldn't call it erotic either. You were talking a lot, both of you, about awakening. So with somebody else can awaken your alertness or being aroused by some idea or by some feeling, to feel alive in certain way. You're becoming more alive when you're in a dialogue with the other. You need that other. But in educational dialogue, or let's say intellectual dialogue, even with very big closeness, I don't think it's erotic. I think it's more some other fifth kind of Greek love or something like that. We should find a way to say that, because yes, it can slip into the all kinds of other kinds of love with which we have a problem, because that's not what we meant to do, and it then becomes it becomes questionable ethically. So finding these boundaries, I think, is very important.
Mm-hmm. Oh, let me tell you that in my class yesterday, I was teaching class, and my students were commenting about previous class, telling how much they hate me, and I appreciate that because, and the reason for that was, when Anna was present at that, but
previous, not this last.
Yeah, the last class they were mostly reflecting on that, but the previous class they talked. It's actually started before that. We were discussing this notion. I don't know how much you heard about this acting white. It's like phenomena in some people, very problematic. Some people disagree that it's happening. Some people see whatever. John Ogbu studied that, and some people whatever. And I wrote about that, something about that. Anyway, I showed them a video about this, and the students were really, how to say that? They were shocked and also very upset with what they call black students sabotaging each other. And we discussed that, and I clearly saw that maybe one or two students start getting this idea of communal betray and stuff like that. But the other, they focused so much about their themselves successful, institutionally successful students, including two black students that I had, and they couldn't just understand how come somebody will, and they experienced, by the way, acting white personally, and they feel very strong feeling against those people, and they couldn't understand. So I decided previous week class, decided to give them a sense of that. So I played this very interesting situation of the war between United States and Russia won. And this is a class when I'm Russian teacher. I have a special Russian cap that is with the Soviet stars and stuff like that. And I will start shaming them for sabotaging their own education. I used a lot of voices that I've heard calling English like dog's language and so on and so forth. Why they couldn't speak Russian, even they don't even have Russian accent. We already spent 2 months and I'm modeling them and they couldn't do that. And anyway, they know that it's a game, but it's game become, I saw in their faces, they smile initially about that, and more and more as it progress, they become more and more serious, and the fear, I can see that fear in their faces. Of course, I exploiting that in the play more and more and more. I elevated two students whom they start hating together with me because they were, and I turn things around, arguing why they sabotaging them and not let them to be successful. Anyway, so they came and they say how much what's interesting for them. They knew that it's a game, but it's very quickly become very serious. They become overwhelmed with emotions, which was not playful emotions. It was serious. It takes them too much even efforts to suppress them because they know it's a play. I know that I'm demonstrating something. At the same time, they were living that through this thing, which they would highly appreciate because they start feeling this acting white. Of course, on very small version, of course, it's not like, but they start appreciating that. And especially for me, it was very interesting. I had a Zoom conversation in between with the black student who told me how now starts she understanding what's the, before she's considered to be ignorant, bad people, and now she started feeling their pain because she was experiencing that. And now it's a part of her. And in this case, I could not call that was not very sexy at all. And now, by the way, they told me that they now feel very interesting because they never knew that I could be like that. And although they know that it's not, I'm playing that, but there was something for them real. Our relationship a little bit changed in terms of the, so, watch that guy. Who knows what can come out? Yes, it is playful, but now we don't know.
Can I say something really quick, Anna? And then
yeah. I just want to say that feeling of closeness does not always have to be pleasant or wished for. You can feel very close with somebody who hits you very hard and hurts you very hard. So I think that we are onto something where, and you said another key word, that you start experiencing things as real. And that is something that I think that feeling of becoming close or becoming real is very important, because then this other imagined or fantasized with PH reality becomes actual or real, because it becomes close to you. You can start feeling as if you're living in it. And this is what I mean by that. But becoming close, it doesn't have to, I think we are being trapped by the word erotic or love or something like that. But becoming close in the sense that you start to feel yourself as really living in another, from another way, in another.
Yeah. I think it's important to keep in mind that when we're talking about play, this stuff is deadly serious, right? Like the best jokes are the ones that touch on something. I've been last kind of few months I've been studying about comedy and stand-up comedy and the art of stand-up comedy. And you listen to interviews with comedians talking about their craft, and they're really clear that what they deal with is deadly serious stuff. And so it's what makes something really good in the sense of good carnival is not that it's all happy and joyful, but that it's deadly serious, right? It's this kind of like juxtaposition where you laugh and you cry at the same time, and that's really where the carnival is.
You're absolutely right. You know, that is where I think the triadic relationship between language, reality, and laughter that I'm trying to work through it is really, it is playful, it is serious, but because it is couched in laughter, that kind of deadly serious truth becomes more digestible, you know, and so it's not, that kind of a laughter is not cheap amusement. See, I don't think we can have a definitive view, I think, of what Eugene, if I could be wrong, eroticism, you know, see, but you know, there is sexual assault, because we had spoken about that. There, it is about power. It had nothing to do with pleasure at all. But the way I like to think about the awakening moment that happens is incredibly in the pleasure mode, not in that kind of something being hammered and forced into you. Then we cannot have that kind of, then it would be, the body would be in pain, not with that entry of an idea being inviting and pleasurable and something that is seeping into your system. So we need to make, that's why that kind of, the nature of the dialogue pretty much either you can cut it off and close yourself, or you can open yourself. Opening yourself, I think I've written this in my book, dialogue is, opening yourself to a dialogue is risk-laden. I don't think it is so simple that we just open ourselves up, because someone could invade you. You know, and what does it mean to be a minority, a woman, or any other number of, where your own sense of selfhood has always been demolished and the other has taken over and the other is defining who you are. At that time, you need to resist that. And so on one hand, the other is an epistemological necessity, right? But at the same time, how do we resist the someone who is exerting too much authority into you and invading that space, but completely shutting the doors and not making the border of the self porous is also equally annihilating, because you're completely shutting the entry of the other. So that's the reason that I find Bakhtin's concept of loophole and rhythm to be a very helpful, because you do need to bring that rhythmic closure very periodically, because otherwise you cannot be opening yourself up to the definitions of the other and embrace it all the time. You have to sort of, that's why the triadic relationship, I for myself, I for others, and others for me, there is a both, it has its openness and it can also have its rhythmic closures, momentary closures. You must know when to shut the other out and when to invite the other in.
Right. I mean, I would just maybe go a slightly different direction, though, and point out that there is an aspect where this can be terrifying and terrible.
Yes.
And very, very hard.
Yeah.
And I think, well, what I'm saying is that's part of this educational experience, right? And this opening.
I think they're saying the same thing, Jim.
Oh, okay. So I guess from the same, so I mean, that's a huge issue, is opening up and the terror of it. And so what I'm thinking of with Bakhtin and this notion of carnival, that, you know, how do we mitigate the kind of terror, or what happens in Eugene's class that they're able to continue on, right? And come back to class, or they don't complain to the dean or what have you, right? What's happening? There is an idea that I've been working on for a bit called earnest irony, right? Where we're earnest in the sense that we're not shying back from the terribleness of it, from the fear, from the anger, the hatred, you know, the types of betrayals that can, like when we open ourselves up to the other can really almost betray us in a way, and that they can deconstruct us. It's very risky and can be very terrifying. So, but there's an earnestness to it, but there's also coupled with it an element of play and laughter. that's not just cheap laughter, but a notion of irony that, well, this is our situation.
And this is what interesting, because there was no irony, there was no laughter. It's just like they were really what I would call like listening yesterday. There, it's more appreciation, because they struggle with this issue, and suddenly now it makes sense, and they appreciate that, despite the fact that it was rather terrifying experience. Depends how, like for some more, for some less, and because I placed them in different positions also as evil oppressor, Russian oppressor. But that's what's important. Yeah, also it's of course important that they give me some kind of consent to do that, although they never knew what they're consenting to.
Yeah.
I
do think that is ironic.
And this is, I cannot, no, it's not ironic, it's a paradoxical, which is not necessarily ironic, because this is always kind of, we always impose on each other, and we cannot get consent because we don't know what we're even consenting about. Mm-hmm. It's always like people say, can I tell you the truth? Well, you cannot say yes or no, because you don't know what the truth is, will be, whether or not it will be truth or not, or it's just pure meanness. But you cannot say, okay, tell me first, and then I will give you consent or not, whether or not I want to hear that or not, because that's also impossible. And this is kind of, but at least they knew that will be something that hit them. And a little bit, and I told them that how much I hate that from the beginning, but again, they didn't understand what I'm talking about. They could only fully appreciate what I was just told them after that. And we talk about how much as a teacher I hate you. By the way, they connected that to, I don't know if you know this teacher, which is interesting, Jane Elliott. You know, blue eyes, brown eyes. It's
about, yeah.
And she connected me with that kind of things. And also we watched a little bit how Jane Elliott telling about how much they hate that experience teaching. She hates that. And then later, when she has a reunion with the students who are now were young adults, and they told her how much they hated her as a kids during that experience, not after, but especially during that experience, because she also put them in position to be oppressed and oppressors. And then she switched that to understand about discrimination and racism. But that's interesting that they related that, and we had that discussion about and whether or not they feel attraction to that type of teaching or not. But I don't think there was any irony about that or laughter, but appreciation. Appreciation was there.
You know, I would actually I'd push back. I do think that they're irony and paradox are so close, right?
They are close. Yeah.
You know, they're very, very close, because irony is a unity of opposites, and it doesn't always mean we have guffaw laughter, but a sense of this kind of like appreciative sense of release. You know, I would still say, to me, it still sounds ironic, even though we weren't kind of like rolling in the aisles or people weren't telling jokes afterwards. There is this kind of unity of opposites that happens there, and I'd argue the appreciation is the kind of the levity that we're talking about in irony.
You know, when about students hating. My students tell me when they don't understand, they hate me, because they're wrestling with the ideas. So it's very difficult for them. And finally, when they get it, they say, "Oh, you know, you're lovable. Otherwise, you appear like a monster in our dreams." That's what they tell me, because they're struggling with simple ideas and they don't know what to do. And I tell them, I don't take it personally. It's fine, you know. This is the way the learning process is, and so I could appear to be a pain in the neck to you in your lives, you know, like a monster, because the ideas seem too monstrous, because it's so esoteric, so distant, so far away. We don't know what to do with it. But once that becomes more manageable and familiar, then it becomes easy to handle. So how I appear at a different time in the classroom can vary, by the day, and depending on the student's own receptiveness or their inability, and they're struggling with it.
I wonder too if maybe what's going on here, like if we push Eugene's example a bit, how is it that he was able to do this with the students? How do you walk through this type of experiment or this type of, because you're deconstructing, you're just, you're being very destructive in some ways, but then there's this appreciation and understanding. How is it they kind of walk through all these embodied experiences? Well, maybe what is going on there is that there's a kind of eroticism in the sense of trust or affection, right? There's a bit of a, okay, well, we'll play along because, we trust the pedagogue, right? Or we have kind of affection for you. And I noticed, like with some students that really connect with me, they struggle, and like Lakshmi was talking about, but why do they keep coming back for more of it? I think it's, and I get some students who take every class I teach almost. And I think it's because there's this kind of affection, this kind of like almost like...
Yeah, it is like, one of the Indian philosophers speaks about laughter as a very tactile kind of an experience, or like a tickling, tickling of the hidden zones. So you want to be as much tickled as well you want to resist it. So when the tickling stops, the child says, no, more. But when you tickle, it's a kind of acute aggression. So that's how I look at it, as putting yourself through this kind of torture. When I dedicated my book to my mentor on Mahabharata, I developed a certain appreciation for this Brooklyn Jewish guy to come and learn about some Indian epic and work with me on that, and asking me all the difficult, impossible questions. And I was saying, no, this is the way the culture is. And he said, I don't know what the F your culture is. This was a kind of a drama that went on. And so when this was Joe Glick, Eugene. So when the book came out, he was telling everyone, oh God, Lakshmi is now going to be really ruthless with me because she's the carnivalesque and she's going to show all the irreverence possible. And I said, damn straight, this is the final revenge that I can get on you. And it was a very hilarious kind of a moment when I am taking revenge. My book is published, but this is for you, Joe. So it had both the affection and the aggression, and everybody laughed, and it was a very I said, I'm a student of Bhakti. I'm not going to let go of this moment by not paying back the dues, right, to him. But it was also an appreciation. This poor man had to learn about some ancient epic and deal with me. And there were my journey with Joe was, what a pain in the neck you are. You are an impossible woman. And I really celebrated the freedom that he gave me to evolve. These are it's both abusive and affectionate, and you put up with all this nonsense. But he asked me the toughest questions. And he died 2 years back, and I so much appreciate. But suppose if I had said, oh, this is the Western imperialism and you don't understand it would have shut down. I would have never been able to. But to be able to engage with him in that playful manner allowed us to have that kind of a carnivalesque experience and still develop a very more than a working and a very affectionate kind of a partnership that was incredibly instrumental in allowing me to, take Bhakti. I mean, otherwise if I had not encountered Bhakti in my grad school, I would have dropped out. That kind of positivist research had no appetite. I had no appetite for that. So I feel that I actually experienced that kind of that tickling. You don't want it. What a pain in the neck, but you want it. This is high drama of, it's like an Italian opera or something.
This ambivalence that you mentioned about irony, it's a unity of opposites. I think that those simultaneous opposite feelings both start to grow at the same time when you start to feel this actual boundary of yourself, and that's why I don't think it's kind of like overlap or unity of consciousness, but you start to feel this push and pull at the same time. That the best was, in words of my 3-year-old son when he was 3 years old, Giga, we were at the Adriatic coast, and it was the first day, and so we were both very white for the mid-noon sun, and I wanted to take him out of the sun before noon, and so about 10:30 I said to him, he was enjoying in the water there, I said to him, let's go for ice cream. And he turned to me and says, I want to, but I don't want to. So that his drama of that moment, how much he wanted to go to ice cream and how much he didn't want to leave that place, was exactly that,
Yeah, it's a good metaphor for education and what happens in a classroom. Is that these types of tensions, right? And I think there's kind of it's possible to talk about kind of a deeper aesthetic in those types of tensions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think right now my crusade is to say, well, what are we doing in education that's actually prohibiting those types of moments? Right.
Those kinds of moments.
Yeah. Like, for example, right now I'm really struggling with learning outcomes and measurable deliverables.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Please.
Right. It feels like it's so hard to talk that language.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And not degrade and take away all opportunity for these types of tensions, these ironic moments.
Yeah. But that I don't even, in very unambiguous way, the instruments of measuring these outcomes and the reality of the classroom, they are so far apart that I find there's no tension or ambiguity. I just am irritated by this, outcomes and measurements and all those metrics that because of certification and program assessment kind of nonsense. So I get it, Jim, because I fight that battle. The only tension is it needs to be accredited, and therefore, and this college move with the IE portfolios, and I like to know who in the heaven's name would even have the patience to go look into all these things. It is a totally bogus data that is so I'm completely, there's no ambiguity there. There's no desire and there is no, it's total waste of time. That's how I feel. Because it's a total mismatch between the practice of education and the measurement of outcome.
Yeah, they are deadening. They make everything dead. They kill everything.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what makes education alive.
And I think there is tremendous fear for this kind of very dialogic pedagogy, because it is it's terrifying. It would rather be at a distance. It is like the Facebook communication rather than face-to-face communication.
Mm-hmm.
Because face-to-face, you have to kind of engage, and that seems more
okay, let's return back to the issue of body through that comments, and this is because part of this kind of Lakshmi and Jim, you're talking about this tendency in education is objectivize subjectivity and make it make machines out of people. So at exams, there is that problem, you can solve it. It's like calculator. You put blah, 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 the predictable answer will come out of that. The same thing about this is basically educationist. So I'm returning back to the notion of body, because in a way, body objectivizes us. But is it objectivized like that way? Like, for example, it's some yes, and this is at least interesting for me. Like, for example, when I don't sleep enough, and the older I become, it's become problem sleeping, right? The more irritable I am, and since I'm irritable, it's very predictable things, and that irritation is very pattern based. There is no meaning about this irritation. Of course, it creates a kind of meaning that Eugene is mean and this and that. That's true as well. And it brings meaning in terms of how I should take responsibility for that, but it's true as well. But, you know, that type of body, I'm not very interested, although it exists. It's there. Like, if you don't eat, you will die. You know, it's also very predictable. It's the same positivistic things. It's outcome based, right? Right. It's very cause effect, and so on and so forth. So we're not talking about that type of, I hope we're not talking about this embodiment. No. We're talking about some kind of other, and this is what I'm trying to get at that, what it is, without, and again, I know that, Lakshmi, you like mystification. I don't like mystification. I kind of feel...
but it's, exactly, I don't like mystification, but what I was trying to say, that what it is when you're making, when you're successful in making this imaginary or fantasized chronotype in which we start to live intellectually, so powerful that you start experiencing it on a body level and experiencing it as if it's real, as if it's not something that is just relational, but that if it really there exists. That's what I think is this embodiment, and it's meaningful embodiment because it feels.
Okay, but I don't feel that it's necessary to talk about body. This is what I call just ontological, which is it's like related to my life, and the body. Yes, of course, ontology comes from the body, but it's not very interesting for me. For me, interesting is drama, like, for example, what's happened with people. And of course, it's holistically involved many things, emotions, cognition, whatever. But I'm not interested why to take bodies like what? This is my body. 5 fingers. So, and I know, by the way, if I have 4 fingers, it will be different in my life. Yes. It's very ontological to have 5 fingers and not 4 or 3 or not at all, or maybe 10. You know, that would be very different. But still, I don't know why focus on body, because it's not just body; it's everything around me, and it's not only physical things. It's everything. You know, and that's, I don't know why to emphasize body for that purpose. Okay.
Well, I think because I go back to the Rabelais book, and there's this beautiful little section where Bakhtin talks about being caught up into the people's mass body, right? Into the concreteness of the community and the other. And so when I talk about the body, I'm not talking about the individual body, but rather the embodiment of ideology, of meaning, and how it is entwined with our rhythmic interactions, right? And so it's not about just your body, Eugene, but our bodies together.
But that rhythmic interaction is, again, feels like patterns. It's about meaningless. It feels very meaningless. It's like patterns. Yes, of course. For example, if I paint these walls around me in the red color, bright, it will start irritating me at some point. It gives me unease. That's true. But again, for me, it's the same thing. It's teaching by outcomes. Deeply down, it's about predictability. It control me. Oh yeah, of course I prefer, like in hospital, I prefer blue and green. True, because it suits me. So what? Yeah, it's kind of ecology. Yeah, that's. I mean, I'm not against that. I'm just think I'm not very excited about that. It's very.
Well, I think you're in a danger here. I think you're hitting on one of the most difficult things when we start talking about embodiment, which is that it can quite easily turn into a form of functionalism.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Which is itself just quite shallow. And
I think it will be helpful to talk about body as considering the particulars. not just simply the abstract, but the grounded, particulars that we very often tend to ignore. And going back to that kind of measurement thing is that people want it like a Weight Watchers thing, before and after, as if education can be measured, a nice picture of before and after, and this is what you got, or this is what you lost, or whatever it is. So my fundamental objection to that kind of a process is it's completely methodologically flawed, because it is not considering the particulars of the classroom, because we have to change our pedagogy very often right in the middle of a classroom to meet the needs of a specific student or specific students, or something does not work. What works in one classroom does not work in another classroom. So we are so sensitive to that particulars, and not that any measuring instrument can incorporate and be sensitive to everything, but if there is a complete kind of a gulf between the reality of the classroom, because what the measuring instruments on what is scoreable, my concern in the classroom is what is teachable and what is learnable, not what is scoreable, and they want you to create assignments that can become scoreable. And I'm resisting that, because I said, this is crazy, because I designed the exams based on what I have taught and what the issues in the classroom are. So you are changing it in order to meet the local reality, right? And whereas the measuring or the certifying institutions want a kind of a complete, so that they can tell the world that look what kind of progress we have made, and all our students are doing fantastic. Well, I mean, even in time, the way the education has its impact and how it sinks in is not so immediate. It takes a long time for it to actually seep into the individual. And this is where I think it is a very dialogic pedagogy in the classroom, and it is a very monologic kind of an instrument, metrics that we are forcing upon. And that I find it very, very troubling in terms. Yeah. So that's how I don't see whether it is eroticism or the body or anything as a literal thing,
I think what for me what allows us to kind of like escape pure functionalism is the lack of predictability. Yeah. And that it is not. A lot of these, when we start talking about the body, the embodiment, the way I'm talking about it, it becomes very difficult to have kind of like a functional predictability, like a determinate relationships among things, right? They're dynamic systems that are shifting and changing. And
But that language that you are just using is very functional, because functions could be very sophisticated. They can be self-organizing, this and that. For me, what makes it without life, there is no meaning there. Mm-hmm. They can be unpredictable, like physical reality is very much unpredictable and so on and so forth, but it doesn't have meaning. And
but the unpredictability isn't randomness. The unpredictability isn't randomness.
It's not random. Physics, if you study that, it deals with non-randomness as well, unpredictability of non-randomness. Mm-hmm. So theory of chaos and stuff like that. It's not random, actually. It's very, it creates a beautiful patterns, very stable patterns, but they're coming out of unpredictable in a way. Or self-organizing things. But again, it's, how to say that? I don't believe that meaning coming of patterns, of these even unpredictable patterns. Mm-hmm. Siri and stuff, voice recognition, stuff like that, it's very unpredictable. It has history. It's like you cannot, if you start Siri from scratch, it will become completely different Siri. Yeah, I'm very interested about that. But
the difference though is that there's agency, right?
For me, it's meaning. It's an agency. If you ask like, where is the agency? It's authorship of the meaning. Mm-hmm. It's not that all of this kind of thing. And I feel that this part of this discourse on embodiment losing that very quickly. And the more it becomes specific, the more it starts losing it. So I want to somehow find a possibility, and I'm struggling with that, when to create this kind of things when it will be not. And again, it's true, I don't know what even body means.
Yeah.
The very concrete body of the humans, and I like that as well, but it's too limited. But I would like to start at least with something like with that.
I missed the last bit, sorry.
Like the body of the personal body, like things, it's maybe limited, but it's a good idea to start with that, because at least it gives you some pleasure. Because our tools can become body as well. Like my glass is part of my body right now, and many other things can become easily part of my body. To some degree, even my computer right now part of my body, because I'm looking. I think I'm looking at you. Of course, I'm looking at the screen. Right, and you may be it's maybe faking, right? I can think about that, but it's exactly, well, it's somebody's produced that images of you, and you actually right now like having fun somewhere or teaching a class. But I right now feel that I'm talking with Jim and Lakshmi, and I would like to start with that. So in this case, I know that it's not just physical, my physicality, and it's will be the body of my body is a body of my physical kind of organic things. I understand, but I want to go in the meaning making, because this is, as soon as we lose that, there is embodiment, non-meaning making, but it becomes functionalism and stuff like that.
And that's the most interesting part about meaning making and what it is. And this is the biggest puzzle still for us, and I don't think we can define it.
But it's interesting.
I want to tell you about a very interesting movie.
Can I interrupt you? We almost running more than 1 hour and 30 minutes. So we
I think
otherwise people
take care of some mundane activities.
So I just want to, as a kind of a closure, to tell you, there is a movie that I just watched last night by chance, and it connects in a certain way to what we were talking about in certain way. It's called Sacrifice. It's on Netflix, and it's some guy who is psychological illusionist, actually manipulated this one person into believing certain things. It's very, I was very ambivalent about this movie. I was very uneasy because it's a huge manipulation of this person. It's like documentary about this whole process, and it's about turning one white nationalist, supremacist guy into such a state that he would take a bullet for an illegal immigrant, and he really did. Wow. So it's like is that this very embodied experience, how he created around him a completely different reality into which he slowly eased him. Is that the best kind of education that we can even imagine? Like, what is it?
I watched that, and actually I have the same question. Maybe we should watch it together at some point. It's very interesting, because from many things, embodiment, because he's working really this by the way, it's not he, it's they, because there are whole crew behind that, and people actually, even this is like so spooky and also disgusting, because even friends of this guy, white supremacist to some degree, his friends cooperating with this team to completely create different embodied experience. And it's and again, is it the best education?
Yes.
Because at the end, it's so strong that embodied experience becomes so strong that
he changes himself personally.
He's really sacrificing his life for unknown person who is illegal immigrant.
And so this is the exact type of thing I think we need to be talking about in education, right? These types of moments and what this looks like.
Right? So yes, this is what.
But the question is: it education or is it brainwash? And you can actually
go in opposite direction.
Yes, yes.
Well, like
taking a person who is very
Mild
humane
and
and make a Nazi out of this person.
yes, and so yes.
yeah. So if we go in a functionalist direction, it is brainwashing, right? But if we preserve the act of agency and meaning making,
And the question
But
is,
where is the boundary?
Yeah.
well,
I have a section in my book in the difference, dialogue, and development. Is it brainwashing or brainstorming? So brainstorming has a dialogic component where you're sort of soliciting divergent viewpoints. Brainwashing is in the hand of one person who is sort of this is actually the problem with as Eugene says, very often that's what goes on in schools, where students are completely put off by education, and they don't want to return, and then they revolt against it in ways that are. It's almost sad. I find it very sad. But sometimes when students feel that they're so put off by education, I ask myself the question, what is it that we could be doing as an institution that we make education so, unbearable?
Reminds me of that Monty Python sex education.
Yeah. But listen, guys, we have to leave because we're already
we need to finish. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right,
So,
Okay, that was, thanks a lot, Jim and
this was
Lakshmi
a
and
wonderful
Anna
podcast.
for organizing that, and it was very interesting.
And so nice to get to know you, Lakshmi. I'd like
thank you very much, Anna. Yes.
few things, yes.
Thank you. I'll send you an email about the book so that you can get it reviewed.
Yeah, it's too bad that Paul Sullivan couldn't participate.
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Yeah, I know. I wish Paul was able to. He had child-minding duties, as he said.
Yeah. Very embodied excuse.
So it was really fun talking with you, Eugene, Anna, and Jim. That was really fun. And maybe we should do this once in a while.
Sure.
Because as we are working on our own respective papers, this could be a motivating factor. And we'll make sure that Paul also joins us from England.
Lakshmi, by the way, talking on that topic, if you have in mind something interesting topic that you want to discuss, please let us know.
Sure.
Like Jim was hosting that, and in a way you could host as well.
Okay, fabulous. That would be great. That would be lovely.
You'll think about something interesting.
Very good. We will do that. As I begin to I'm in the midst of my semester, so it's crazy time. So, all right. So how do we get off this?
Okay. End the meeting at the end, on the bottom left.
Okay.
right, thank you. I think this does open the door, though. We should actually do another one on technology in the classroom.
Yes.
Jim, do you want to do next week?
Not next week. Maybe 2 weeks.
Well, send us email when you think you want to do it.
Jim, put your proposal. I'll put a new poll on Facebook and just put the topic there, and so we will see.
Very good. We will do that.
All right. Thank you so much. You've been very kind.
Bye bye. Bye, Jim.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.